When the Vikings reached northern Britain, they did not enter an empty land. They encountered the Picts, a powerful society that had shaped Scotland for centuries, yet never explained itself in writing. For generations, the Picts dominated much of northern Britain. They fought Rome to a standstill, ruled organized kingdoms, and left behind monuments that still rise from the Scottish landscape. And yet, they left no histories in their own voice. This film examines who the Picts were, how archaeologists reconstruct their world, and why understanding them is essential to understanding the world the Vikings later encountered. The Picts enter recorded history only through the words of others. Roman chroniclers, Christian monks, and later medieval historians all mention them, yet none of these voices belong to the Picts themselves. The name Picti appears in Roman sources in the late 3rd century. It is likely derived from a Latin term meaning painted or marked, a description imposed from the outside, not an identity chosen from within. What the Picts called themselves remains unknown. This absence of self-written history shapes everything we think we know about them. Unlike Rome, they left no chronicles. Unlike later medieval kingdoms, they produced no surviving royal annals. Their past must be reconstructed indirectly through material traces left in the ground. Archaeologists and historians therefore rely on what survives. Carved stones standing in open fields, fragments of metalwork buried in soil, and the layout of settlements etched into the landscape. Each artifact must be read with caution, not as myth or legend, but as evidence shaped by context and use. By the time Viking fleets began appearing along Scotland's coasts, Pictish society was already deeply established. Its political structures, territories, and cultural systems were not improvised. They had developed over generations. The Picts are not mysterious because they were deliberately silent. They are mysterious because history failed to preserve their voice. Pictish society developed across eastern and northern Scotland, a landscape defined by river valleys, rolling uplands, and exposed coastlines shaped by the North Sea. This was not empty wilderness. It was a lived-in environment, carefully managed and deeply understood by the communities who depended on it. Archaeological evidence reveals a world structured around agriculture and seasonal movement. Fields were cleared and maintained. Livestock was herded between lowland pastures and higher ground. Small rural settlements formed the backbone of daily life, linking families to land through labor, memory, and inheritance. Power in Pictish society did not rise from cities or monumental capitals. It emerged from control of territory. Land meant food, loyalty, and survival. Kinship networks tied people to specific places, creating obligations that extended beyond individual households. Across this landscape, hill forts and enclosed sites appear with striking regularity. These were not merely defensive refuges, they were statements of authority. From these elevated positions, leaders gathered followers, stored surplus wealth, and demonstrated their ability to command resources and protection. In Pictish Scotland, landscape itself was political. To hold land was to hold power. To shape the land was to shape society. One of the greatest challenges in understanding the Picts lies in their language. Unlike many neighboring cultures, they left behind no written histories that explain how they spoke, thought, or named their world. Only a small number of inscriptions survive. Some are carved into stone, using an early script known as Ogham. These markings appear to record names, perhaps of individuals, families, or territories, but they offer little sense of grammar, syntax, or storytelling. They are fragments, not voices. Most scholars agree that the Pictish language was related to the Brittonic family, the linguistic ancestors of Welsh and Breton. Yet how closely it was connected, and how it functioned in everyday life, remains debated. The evidence is simply too thin to allow certainty. What language survives does so quietly, through place names. Across eastern Scotland, elements such as pit, meaning a portion of land, still shape the map. Rivers, valleys, and settlements preserve sounds from a language no longer spoken. Here, language becomes archaeology. It is not found in manuscripts or chronicles, but embedded in the landscape itself. Each name is a fossil, marking where a people once lived, spoke, and understood their world even after their words fell silent. Across Scotland, carved stones still stand in open fields, churchyards, and on exposed hillsides. They are not hidden in museums by chance. They remain where they were meant to be seen. These symbol stones are among the most distinctive and enduring remains of Pictish culture. Carved between roughly the 6th and 9th centuries, they display a limited but carefully repeated set of motifs: animals, geometric shapes, mirrors, combs, and abstract forms whose meanings are still debated. Some stones show only these symbols, arranged with deliberate spacing and balance. Others combine traditional Pictish imagery with Christian crosses and biblical scenes, reflecting a society in transition rather than replacement. These stones were not decoration. They were statements. They marked authority, memory, and identity within the landscape. Whether they represented individuals, kin groups, territorial claims, or legal power remains uncertain, but their consistency suggests a shared visual language understood by those who lived among them. The stones functioned as communication in a society that left few written words. They spoke through placement, repetition, and symbol rather than text. Today, they remind us that Pictish culture was not primitive or chaotic. It was visually sophisticated, carefully structured, and deeply intentional, even as its spoken language faded from history. Early medieval sources suggest that Pictish kingship may have followed a different logic from that of many neighboring societies. Several writers imply that succession favored candidates connected through the female line, rather than relying strictly on father-to-son inheritance. This does not mean that women routinely ruled as queens in their own right. Instead, it suggests that legitimacy was grounded in lineage, not gender alone. Royal descent may have been traced through mothers, creating a system in which claims to power were broader and less vulnerable to sudden breaks. If accurate, such a structure would have reduced internal conflict over succession. Rival claimants could appeal to shared maternal ancestry rather than competing paternal lines. This may help explain the relative stability of certain Pictish dynasties across generations. Historical records also reference influential royal women and queens associated with Pictish rule. Their prominence is unusual when compared to many contemporary societies and hints at a political culture in which women held recognized authority within dynastic networks. Archaeology alone cannot confirm matrilineal succession, but when material evidence is considered alongside written sources, a picture emerges of a society where women may have exercised significant influence over power, continuity, and legitimacy. This challenges modern assumptions about early medieval political structures. It reminds us that authority in the past did not always follow the patterns we expect or the ones later histories chose to emphasize. Pictish metalwork reveals a society highly skilled in both technology and symbolic expression. Surviving objects, silver brooches, pins, chains, and ornamental fittings display a level of craftsmanship that required time, training, and access to valuable materials. Techniques such as filigree and granulation demanded precise control of heat and metal. Fine wires were twisted and soldered. Tiny beads of precious metal were fused into complex patterns. These were not improvised creations. They reflect workshops, traditions, and artisans working within an established cultural system. Such objects were not part of everyday dress. They marked status and authority. Worn by elites, they communicated rank, alliance, and identity in societies where power was displayed through visibility rather than written titles. Across both metal and stone, repeated motifs appear with striking consistency. Among them is the so-called Pictish beast, an animal form whose exact meaning remains unknown. Its persistence across materials suggests not decoration, but shared symbolism, a visual language recognized by those within the culture. In Pictish society, art was not individual self-expression, it was social communication. Objects carried meaning beyond beauty, embedding power, memory, and belonging into forms meant to be seen, recognized, and understood by the community that surrounded them. The Picts built structures that still command attention, even after centuries of exposure to wind, rain, and time. Their architecture was not accidental. It reflected planning, labor coordination, and a deep understanding of stone and landscape. Among the most striking of these structures are brochs, tall, circular towers built entirely of dry stone. Their walls were thick, carefully balanced, and internally complex, containing stairways, passages, and chambers constructed without mortar. That many brochs still stand today is evidence of engineering knowledge passed down through generations. These towers were not isolated monuments. They were part of a wider network of fortified places that included hill forts, enclosures, and defended settlements. Together, they shaped a landscape where security and authority were visibly expressed. Fortifications served practical purposes. They allowed communities to respond to threat, to protect people, livestock, and stored resources. But they also served symbolic ones. From elevated positions, these structures projected control over surrounding land and movement. Construction itself was political. To build in stone was to claim permanence. It signaled stability, authority, and the intention to endure a statement written not in words, but in architecture. In the 6th century, Christian missionaries began moving into Pictish territory, bringing with them a new belief system and a new way of organizing the world. This was not a sudden conversion imposed by force. It was a gradual process that unfolded over generations. Monastic centers, strongly influenced by Irish Christianity, became new nodes of authority within Pictish society. These institutions introduced literacy, record-keeping, and new forms of social organization. They did more than spread faith. They reshaped how power was remembered, recorded, and legitimized. Conversion did not erase older traditions overnight. Pre-Christian symbols continued to hold meaning, even as Christian imagery spread across the landscape. This coexistence is most clearly visible in the Class II symbol stones, where carved crosses appear alongside traditional Pictish motifs. The stones reveal a society negotiating change rather than abandoning its past. Christian belief was absorbed into existing structures of identity, authority, and memory. Old symbols were not rejected. They were reinterpreted. Religion, in this context, did not replace Pictish identity. It reshaped it. The adoption of Christianity altered how the Picts understood power, history, and the sacred, while still grounding those ideas in a cultural language that had developed long before the first missionaries arrived. The Picts were not passive victims of history. From their earliest appearance in Roman records, they are described as organized, resilient, and capable of sustained resistance. Their opposition to Roman expansion helped define the northern boundary of Roman Britain, shaping the political geography of the island for centuries. Later, a different force arrived by sea. Beginning in the late 8th century, Viking fleets began striking along Scotland's coasts and river systems. These raids did not introduce chaos into an otherwise stable world. They accelerated changes that were already underway. Coastal power structures were tested, trade routes shifted, older centers of authority were weakened by repeated pressure and disruption, yet conflict was only part of the story. At the same time, alliances between Pictish and Gaelic groups increased, intermarriage linked ruling families. Shared interests replaced older divisions. By the 9th century, elites on both sides were increasingly interconnected, blurring political and cultural boundaries. What followed was not sudden collapse. There was no single moment of defeat, no clear end marked by conquest Instead, Pictish society was transformed through a combination of warfare, adaptation, and integration. Change came not as destruction, but as reconfiguration, a slow reshaping of power in a world growing more interconnected by force, movement, and necessity. The Picts did not vanish in fire or conquest. There is no evidence of a final battle, no archaeological horizon marked by sudden destruction. Instead, their disappearance unfolded gradually, through merger rather than annihilation. Over time, language shifted toward Gaelic. Administrative and cultural centers were reorganized. Older political structures adapted to new realities, shaped by alliance, intermarriage, and shared interests. Identity did not collapse, it transformed. This process is most clearly visible in the emergence of a unified kingdom under rulers such as Kenneth MacAlpin, a figure associated with both Pictish and Gaelic heritage. His reign did not signal the end of the Picts as a people, but the integration of their elites, traditions, and territories into a new political order. Pictish culture did not disappear. It was absorbed, reinterpreted, and carried forward within the framework of medieval Scotland. Artistic motifs, territorial boundaries, and systems of power continued to shape the emerging kingdom, even as the name Pict faded from written records. The Picts were not erased from history. They became part of it in a different form, woven into the foundations of a nation that would carry their legacy long after their name was no longer spoken. So who were the Picts? They were farmers who shaped fields from difficult ground, builders who raised stone structures meant to endure, artists who spoke through symbol rather than text, and rulers who organized power without leaving written explanations behind. They shaped landscapes, resisted empires, and marked their presence with symbols still carved into stone. Their influence was real, sustained, and deeply rooted in place. The Picts did not disappear because they failed. They disappeared because history changed the way power was expressed and remembered. Language shifted, political centers realigned, older identities were absorbed into new ones. When the Vikings arrived, they did not erase the Picts. They entered a world already in motion, a society adapting to pressure, alliance, and transformation. What followed was not destruction, but continuity under a different name. The story of the Picts reminds us that history is not only written in texts, it is written in land, in material remains, and in patterns of memory that outlast words. Some voices fall silent not because they were weak, but because they were never recorded. Understanding the Picts means learning how to listen differently to evidence rather than narrative, to absence as much as presence. The stones still stand, the land still remembers. What other histories are waiting, not to be rediscovered, but to be understood